always amazed when we come to a medical clinic that we can come out to a field or something that there's absolutely nothing, and it becomes a well-oiled machine of medical care. How long have we been doing this?
This is our 100th outreach.
That's awesome.
I want to say it's close to 10 or 11 years.
Walk us through how this process works for your team.
Patients, they come in and they wait in line. From there, they'll go in and wait some times and see a nurse for triage, where they'll ask their primary chief complaint. What's the one main reason that you're here? How can we help you? From there, they're afforded the opportunity to either see a doctor or a dentist completely free of charge. From the doctor, we ask every single patient that comes in, can we pray for you? And then from there, once they exit, they come here and they receive free medicine.
Describe for someone watching at home what you see out here on a regular basis. What is it like?
Some have the same our patients at home have, but we also have rare diseases we don't see in Europe. And I also have the experience that the patients here are very humble, they are very thankful, and they have the hope that you bring them some help. There was a man who was coming because he said he cannot see properly. So we tried glasses, and I really loved this moment when he put on the glasses, and I could see that he gets really happy, and then he just said, I can read. And I was like, just didn't want to freak out totally, but...
Have to stay professional, and yet you're so excited for what's happening. That's awesome. Are people impacted for Christ through what you're doing here?
Yes, I think so, because I do that because I love Jesus. I think they feel that. And yeah, sometimes we just pray right at the investigation table, just to make them know that Jesus is the doctor all above us.
Yeah. Here at the medical clinic, we are seeing many people getting help that they've needed for a long time. And our wonderful volunteers here, they work so hard. And we're just so grateful for all of you that make this possible. So right now, let me just ask you to be a part of everything that we're doing. Your special gift today can help lives in ways that you can never imagine. But together, we can make a big, big difference. So call us right now, go to the website, joycemeyer.org, and give a special gift today that will help people, not only here in Africa, but all over the world.
Wil je leren hoe je God kunt vertrouwen? Lees dan het themaboekje Leer God te vertrouwen. Compact en treffend. Nu voor €4,50 te bestellen. Telefonisch of via joyce-meyer.nl.
Al gezien? Vissen impulsen. Nu bij Joyce Meyer Nederlands op Facebook. Stichting De Vriend helpt de daklozen met woord en daad. Door €1 maandelijks te doneren gaat u het lot van de dakloze keren.
Nou, omdat het een feest was. En tijdens het feest mochten er geen criminelen veroordeeld worden. Ze moesten wachten tot na het feest. En dit feest, dat is ook het feest van de verlossing, Pesach, duurde 7 dagen. Dus hier zie je ook alweer de hand van de Heere God, dat Petrus in de gevangenis bleef 7 dagen.
enthousiast als ik toen ik voor het eerst dit programma zag. We gaan nu weer het volgende programma draaien. De Bijbel is namelijk het meest betrouwbare boek dat bestaat. Daar kan ik ook uren over vertellen, want er bestaan geen manuscripten die zo betrouwbaar zijn dan de Bijbel door de eeuwen heen. Dus ook tot op vandaag aan de dag. En daarom hebben we op deze site www.woonbijbel.nl. En al die programma's zenden we ook uit op brinktv.com. U kunt ze elk moment kunt u ze zien. Dus als u deze gezien hebt en de vorige niet, dan kijkt u even op brinktv.com. Kunt u ze allemaal weer zien. En woonbijbel.nl wil dus zeggen dat ga nou toch eens een keer in die Bijbel wonen. Want ik blijf zeggen, je leest de Bijbel niet, maar de Bijbel leest jou. Als de Bijbel, en heel veel mensen twijfelen daaraan natuurlijk, maar als de Bijbel het woord van God is, de openbaring van God, dan leest die Bijbel jou. En als die Bijbel jou leest, moet je heel voorzichtig zijn, want dan zijn er miljoenen mensen door de eeuwen heen die hebben dat woord in hun hart laten zakken en zijn, noemen ze dat, tot geloof gekomen, maar hebben een geweldige kijk gekregen op het leven wat ze nu leven en ook het eeuwige leven. Nou, wie zou dat nog willen missen? Maar luister maar niet meer naar mij, ga nu het programma maar kijken en ik ben ervan overtuigd dat je ervan zult genieten.
Thank you for being with us today. I hope that so far you've had a good time following the discussions with Jay Smith and I. We will continue our conversations in this program. Come and join us. In our conversations with Muslim friends, we often encounter the claim that the Koran is a perfect heavenly book. It is inimitable. It has no imperfections, no problems. It was sent down from heaven to earth, has been copied throughout the generation from the beginning, and it has reached us in a perfect form. It's the only perfect book. All the previous scriptures have been corrupted, except the Quran. Is that claim a plausible claim in light of the latest research and studies?
I tell my students is to find out what the claims are. Go to the Muslims and find out what they say about their Quran. Now they'll say a number of things. They'll say it's perfect in its makeup. It's perfect in its literary qualities. It's unique in that it is the only book that can claim to be sent down from God, that it exists today. They would say the previous scriptures, though, they had been sent down to the different prophets through the different ages, starting with Adam from the very beginning. There's about 125,000 of them, all receiving revelations. We don't have those revelations today. And they would say that even the Taurat, which is the book that was sent down to Moses, or the Zabur, which was sent down to David, or the Injil, which was sent down to Isa, Jesus, is not the original ones that were given down. They've been corrupted along the way. So that the Quran is unique. They would say it's unique. It's the only one that has not been changed. It is unfettered. The codex that we have today is the same as that was compiled by Uthman, the Caliph Uthman, or under the auspices of Uthman in the mid-7th century, 650. Now they make other claims too. They'll say that it has perfect grammar. They'll say that the Arabic that it uses is perfect Arabic. They'll say that there are no errors, that there are no contradictions. They'll say that it was collated perfectly when it was brought together. I think what we need to do is we need to go back through each one of these claims. It's what we call the internal critique. That's looking at these claims internally and trying to pull them apart, trying to find out how is it that we today in the West are actually ascertaining whether or not these are true or not. And then we need to do a second thing. There's a new study that's coming out of Britain primarily, here in London and also in Germany, but it really was created in this city called the Revisionist School of Orientalism. It was started by a man named Dr. John Wansborough at the School of Oriental and African Studies, just down the road, not too far from here, back in the 1970s. He wasn't the first, but he's the one that has been credited with basically opening up the revisionist school, which is looking at the historical claims of the Quran. We did this with the Bible. We went and looked at the historical claims of the Bible. We went and looked and asked whether or not people's, places, events, time periods can be corroborated with extra-biblical events, or certainly extra-biblical criteria, archaeological diggings, documents, manuscripts. The same thing must be done with the Quran. And so this school that's come out of Britain, come out of School of Oriental and African Studies, also Oxford University, Cambridge University with people like Dr. Patricia Koran, now Princeton University in America with Dr. Michael Cook and Koran, others who are coming out of Germany like Dr. Gerd Quinn and Dr. von Bothmer. I could give you other names. I don't think that's important right now. We can refer to them as we come to them. What they're saying is something very important. They're saying if the Quran was compiled in 650, as Muslims tell us, that's the classical model. If it was compiled at that time, and the Uthmanic recension that we have today is that original codex, first of all, are there any manuscripts to support it? Secondly, do the historical references in that book, and there are lots of historical references in the Quran, references about Mecca, references about Medina, references about Muhammad himself, references about the people that surround him, the companions, references about how his relationship with his wives, his relationship with the people surrounding him, and certainly not just the Quran, but also all the other material that is incorporated into Islam as we know it today. You know what I'm talking about, the traditions, the Sunnah of the Prophet, that which you need to understand the Quran. And by that we're talking about the Sirah Rasulullah, which would be the biography of the Prophet himself. First compiled by Ibn Ishaq in 765, then written out by Ibn Hisham, and in fact it's Ibn Hisham's that we're dependent on, and then of course Al-Waqidi, and those sirahs, those biographies of the Prophet were first written down in 820 or around 830 to 833. Muhammad died in 632, so they were written down 200 years after the fact. The Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet himself, first compiled by Al-Bukhari, he died in 870. These were written between 850 and 870. Again, listen, look at the dates. If Muhammad died in 630, you're talking about 200 to 230 years after the fact. Or the tafsir. The tafsir are interesting because that's the commentaries that help us to understand the Quran. Written first down by a man named Al-Tabari, who died in 923, the 10th century. And then, of course, the Tahriq, which would be the histories himself of all of mankind up until the time of Muhammad himself. First compiled by Al-Tabari, then there's many that come after. Now, if that is the case, all this material, the Quran plus the traditions, are, if they do talk about a man and places and events that happened in the 7th century, can we find extra Quranic evidence to support it? Much like we did with the Bible. Is there extra biblical evidence to support the Bible? And we found, yes, absolutely. As you can see from the museum tour that we did, there is so much evidence that we found from the Assyrian period, Babylonian period, the Persian period, the patriarchal period, the Davidic kingdom, so much material that corroborate the biblical text. The same thing must be asked of the Quran. Would you not expect that?
I have talked to many Muslim friends. A lot of times our Muslim friends object that the Gospels were written 30, 40, 50 years after Jesus.
Yeah.
How can we trust them?
Yeah.
And yet you're telling us that the biography of the Prophet or his sayings were written maybe up to 200 years.
200 to 300 years.
Yes, and so, you know, if the Muslim friends have a hard time trusting the Gospels after such a short period of time, between the time Jesus lived and their compilation, how come they can so easily trust the biographies of the Muslim writers and historians and traditionalists? So that in itself to me is a fascinating.
Sasan, you're bringing up one of the primary difficulties that Muslims have not admitted. Let's just unpack that a little bit, because obviously the audience needs to hear what you're saying. Take that again. Look at the years. When we look at the biblical, and people say the Bible, the New Testament especially, is based on oral tradition. And that is true. There is oral tradition over a period of 20, 30, 40, 50.
Teachings of Jesus,
Teachings of
from his
Jesus.
disciples to...
We've talked now about 4 genres of traditions. We've talked about the Sirah, which is the biography of Muhammad. We also have a Sirah for Jesus. The black letter edition of the Gospels is the Sirah of Jesus, is it not? It's his story. We also have the Hadith of Jesus, much like the Hadith of Muhammad. The sayings of Muhammad, we also have the sayings of Jesus, which would be the red letter parts of the Gospel. For those of us who have Bibles that are written with black and red letter, we know what we're talking about. That's the sayings of Jesus in red letters. So there's the hadith of Jesus. One step further, the tafsir, which would be the commentaries written by Al-Tabari, Baidawi, Zamakhshari, Suyuti, all the others that come after, a whole litany of commentators that come after the 10th century. They are basically expounding, explaining the Quran, because there's a good bit of the Quran you can't understand. A good 20% of the Quran nobody can understand. Even the scholars can't understand. We know that. We've heard it. You can see that. Just open the Quran, you'll see the problem with it. So if a fifth of it can't even be understood by the scholars, where do you go? You go to the traditions. You go specifically to the tafsir. Well, we also have a tafsir in the New Testament. Paul's letters. There's the commentary on the gospel of Jesus Christ. Paul expounds, explains, puts it into real frameworks. He puts it into settings such as the church in Ephesus, the church in Philippi, the church in Corinth. There's the tafsir of Paul for the gospel of Jesus Christ. But then we've got the fourth one as well. The last remaining one that's in the traditions is the tahqiq, the history. Histories leading up to the time of Muhammad himself. Do we not also have a history in the New Testament? The book of Acts. There is the history of the early church. So there you have all four genres in the New Testament. The Sirah of Jesus, the Hadith of Jesus, the Tafsir of Jesus' Gospel with Paul's letters, and of course the history of Tahqiq in the book of Acts. Okay, if that's the case, we know that all four of those genres of literature were first written down starting in around 820 up until 923. So the 9th and 10th century for that which was happening in the 7th century, 200 to 300 years later. But the Sirah, the Tafsir, the Hadith, and the Tahqiq of Jesus were all written 20 to 30 years after his death. And what's more important, by those who were there. Matthew knew Jesus. John knew Jesus. Mark certainly was there at the same time. Luke is the only one that did not know Jesus. And he gets it from the eyewitnesses. That's the beauty of the Hadith, or you might say the traditions of Jesus, which the New Testament is, if you want to get a good comparison. They're written while the disciples were still in Jerusalem. That's why Luke says at the very beginning, in the first 3 verses of Luke 1, "O Theophilus, I've taken it upon myself," so I'm paraphrasing it here, "to basically tell you what you told me," just recapping what you've given me, correct it if I'm wrong. He's writing this to the disciples, those who were with Jesus those last 3 years of his ministry, who were there with him when he said the things he said, when he did the things he did, and therefore they could either corroborate it or dispute what was in that account. Now, that immediately gives an enormous amount of authority to the New Testament, which we don't have for the traditions. 20 to 30 years, as you admit, we can accept, because they were all written while the disciples were still in Jerusalem. The disciples didn't leave Jerusalem until it was destroyed in 70 AD. Therefore, they were all there to be able to corroborate this event. Who was there when the traditions of Islam were written? Who in the 9th century knew Muhammad? Who in the 10th century even lived in that same area? See, all these traditions in the 9th and 10th century were not even written in Arabia. They were written in what is present-day Iran and Iraq, your country. Look at the names. Bukhari. Bukhari is not an Arab name. It's a Persian name. From Bukharistan, which is in Persia. Tabari is not an Arab name. It's from Tabaristan, which also is from your country. These are people that actually lived in these hundreds of miles away from the event and hundreds of years difference. Yet Muslims never question them. I've never seen Muslims question these traditions. And to me, that's absolutely incredulous. They question the New Testament documents, which are 20 to 30 years written by the people who were right there, who saw it with their own eyes, or got it from the evidence from the people in their own eyes, yet they don't question their own traditions. To me, that's incredulous that this is not happening. We need to do that. But let's get back to the Quran. The Quran is really where it really comes. That's where the rubber hits the road. That's really the book that we need to talk about. Let's now look at these claims, and let's take each one of these one by one. And let's go back to them, and let's start first with the idea that it's being unique. Now, when you go back to Mishkat al-Masabi, which is the compilation of the first earliest 6 traditions, or the 6 hadith that are the most important, in Mishkat al-Masabi it says this: "The Quran is the greatest wonder among the wonders of the world." I'm quoting this. "This book is second to none in the world according to the unanimous decision of the learned men in points of diction, style, rhetoric, thoughts, and soundness of laws and regulation to shape the destinies of mankind." Now, what does that say to you when you hear this reference?
It's the most perfect book in the world, and everybody who is educated and learned it agrees on that point.
Now, There it is. So it's basically setting itself up on a pedestal.
Yes.
Basically, if you put it up on a pedestal to that end, that it is the greatest book in the world, that it cannot be equal. In fact, the Quran also makes that reference. If you go to Surah 10, now let me explain what I mean by surah and ayah. Of course, many of your Persian friends won't have a problem. A surah is a book, an ayah is a verse. When I say surah 10, ayah 37 to 38, I'm saying book number 10. There's 114 books in the Quran. Ayah 37 to 38 means verse number 37 and 38 for those people who are not aware of the reference. Surah 10, ayah 37 to 38, also Surah 2, ayah 23, and Surah 17, ayah 88, say that bring therefore a chapter like unto it. If you do not trust it, bring any chapter, any book.
This is the Quran challenging non-Muslims to bring a book like
And Muslims as well, anybody.
Muslims, yes.
If there's anybody that's in doubt that this is not the mother of the book, which the Quran claims for itself in Surah 43:3, it says this is the mother of all books. That's internal claim of the Quran. Bring therefore a chapter like unto it. I get this. In fact, it's fascinating. Whenever I do a debate with a Muslim scholar on the Quran, usually sometime in the debate this comes up. In fact, let me give you an example. I was at Trafalgar Square right here in London a few years ago. Every year around August, they have what they call the Rally for Islam. The Muhajirun, which is the most radical party here in Britain, puts on this rally. They bring thousands of Muslims down, and they have a real tamasha, as we say in India. And I always go to them with my team, and I was called up on the stage by Sheikh Omar Bakri Mohammed, the founder and the president of the Al-Muhajirun party. We're good friends, and we've known each other for a number of years. And he calls me up to do a debate on the spot, right there on the Quran versus the Bible. So we did a debate right on the spot in front of these thousands of Muslims. After the debate, it was obvious that he was not getting many points, and I had a lot more material than he had on the Quran. So finally he turned to me and he gave me this challenge. Okay, Mr. Smith, you believe that the Quran is not the best book in the world, and he then quoted Surah 10, 37 and 38. Show me one surah that is better. Give me one. So I took out this Bible right here. This is my trusty sword. I took out this Bible. It's really mangled now. I've used it so much. And I opened up to Psalm 23. And I just very clearly, in the microphone and sedately, read through Psalm 23, nice and loud and clearly. Then I turned to him and I says, now you show me a surah like that. Show me any surah that can match Psalm 23. And they asked me to leave the stage. Now, why did they ask me to leave the stage, Sasan? Can you see why? There is nothing in the Quran that equals Psalm 23. We don't make that claim for the Bible. We don't need to make that claim for the Bible. Yet it is there. But don't just stop with Psalm 23. I could have gone to Psalm 1, Psalm 2, Psalm 9, you name it. Any of those Psalms. I could have gone to 1 Corinthians 13. I could have gone to Matthew 5. And I tell my students, go to whatever is your favorite passage. Whenever they make this claim about a surah like it, give them a surah in the Bible. It's much better than anything you'll find in the Quran. You won't get the poetry like we have in the Bible. You won't get the content like we have in the Bible. And that goes into the next point, because they say that the Quran is superior. Literally, it is superior to any other piece of literature. Yet, stop and look. How many times have you read the Quran, Sasan?
about a dozen times.
Okay, when you read it, now, you're a native Persian speaker.
And I was a Muslim. I even read it as a Muslim.
As a Muslim,
Yeah.
when you read it, what's the impression you get as far as literary qualities of the Quran?
To me, there were not a lot of coherent stories that you could follow.
Okay.
There are some beautiful passages, obviously, but overall, the thoughts were jumping back and forth, not easy to follow.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, did you notice any stories were they complete?
Actually, no. The longest is the story on Joseph.
In fact, that's the only complete story in the whole Quran.
but the rest of them are just basically short passages referring to another biblical account or story, but not the whole story.
Was there any chronology?
No.
Okay, so it jumps all over the place. Starts in the middle of a story, doesn't finish that story, another story interjects over into that has nothing to do with the first story, another story interjects into that, and this happens over and over and over again. No transitional phrases to help you from one to the other. It assumes you already know the story because it jumps right in without giving any introduction, and this is typical of the Quran. So when Muslims tell me that it has perfect literary style, I actually look at them and I'm befuddled, because when I look at my Bible, we don't have that problem, do we? What do you notice about the Bible?
A very coherent story from the beginning to the end.
Absolutely. I mean, it starts with a historical setting there in the Garden of Eden. It continues with the fall of man, and then from there on out, it shows how God then moves us back. There is a flow right through the Old Testament. Every prophet adds to that story, doesn't contradict that story. There's transitional phrases, and it's chronological. The story begins, the story ends. It continues right through it all the way up, promising that there's somebody going to come to take care of that problem that happened at the very beginning, and he's going to be called the Son of Man, he's going to be called the Son of God, he's going to be called the Messiah. Over 300 prophecies all pointing to this one man, and then finally we're waiting for it all this time, saying in the New Testament, here he comes, and his name is Jesus. It's such a beautiful book. It flows, it is continuous, it all is of one piece. And so when Muslims tell me that the Quran is better than this, and I look at it, and I can't even get through one chapter without getting confused. I can't get through one story without even knowing where it's going or why no stories are chronological. I absolutely am astounded by this claim. So what we have done is I put together, well, not me, some people in South Africa put together just some comparisons. And I have a whole list here. Surah 76, compare that with 1 Timothy 2 or Luke 15 or John 10. Surah 111 with Francis Assisi's prayer. Surah 109 versus Psalm 23. That's a good comparison. A great one that I like is Surah 2, Surah 4. These are the stories, these are the references to women in the Quran. Compare that with Ephesians 5. And when we do these comparisons, there's no comparisons, Hassan. The Bible is such a beautiful book. Talk about literary qualities. Not only does it give you the problem, it gives you a solution, and then it points you to God in every case. The Quran just gives you pronouncement, rules, and regulations, institutions that leave you cold, that leaves you basically looking for God. So it's fascinating that Muslims make this claim, and what we need to do, I think as Christians, is we need to answer those claims. But I can't think of a better answer than right here. Every time they make those claims, show them something better in the Bible. Because we've got it. There's the beauty of it. And I love the fact that they interject. In fact, they're the ones that usually initiate the question. And what I tell my students is use their questions and use it as a platform then to preach the gospel. Because in every one of these questions, it can lead you into the gospel. Psalm 23. When I read Psalm 23, like I did with Sheikh Umar Bakri Muhammad, I tell them, let me tell you about the God this talks about. This God that comes and walks with you. This God that comes and sacrifices for you. This God that comes and relates to you. Show me a God like that in the Quran. Let me just read you what the experts say concerning the Quran. Because if it is such a great book, if it is so unique literally, I would assume that those who spent their lifetime, their whole career studying it, would also come to the same conclusion. But I'm not going to go to a Muslim, because I know what the Muslims are going to say. Absolutely. There's no question. Muslims have to say that. I've never heard a Muslim that would not say that, because if you did not say that, you would have a lot of problems with your co-religionists. So let's go to those people who are neutral, people who do not claim to be Christians or Muslims, but they've spent their whole life reading the Quran. Let's see what they say. I'm going to go to Germany. I'm going to give you two experts. One is called Theodor Nollecke. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it in German. This is what he says about the Quran after spending a whole career studying this book. He says, and I quote, "It is full of chaotic confusion, prosaic, stiff in style, tedious sermonizing, rhetorical, never metrical, and the rhyme on the whole a burdensome yoke. Superfluous verbiage, syntax betrays great awkwardness, tiresome effect of its endless iteration, so that dogma turns a defective literary production," my goodness, look at what he's saying, into, and I quote, in what he quotes, "an unrivaled masterpiece, comma, in the eyes of the believers." But certainly not in his eyes. Now,
Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder.
Exactly.
It's a very subjective judgment.
it's a very subjective judgment. This is what a neutral critic says. Now, this man speaks fluent Arabic. It's not that he's dependent on the German.
Yes.
He's actually going to the Arabic himself. He spent his whole life studying the Quran, and this is the conclusion he's come to. Let me give you another example. Salman Reinach, also from Germany, says this: "From the literary point of view, the Quran has little merit. Declamation, repetition, puerility, a lack of logic and coherence strike the unprepared reader at every turn. It is humiliating to the human intellect to think that this mediocre literature has been the subject of innumerable commentaries and that millions of men are still wasting time in absorbing it." Now, I would never say that about the Quran. I don't have the right to say that.
A little bit harsh.
It's very harsh. But if these men who spent their whole lives studying the Quran, if this is the conclusion they have come to, if this is what this is the only conclusion they have come to, then who am I to argue? And I ask Muslims if they believe that the Quran is so beautiful, if they believe that it has no literary defects, convince me. I'm not convinced. These men are not convinced. And I think it's not good enough just to say it and repeat it over and over again, louder and louder and louder. You've got to convince us. I don't see it in there. You don't see it in there, do you, Sazan?
No. I mean, again, as I said, to me, it has always struck me as such a subjective claim to make. It's like me saying, my wife is the most beautiful wife in the world. And so I cannot imagine this kind of a subjective argument being presented as as an objective, rational defense
Yeah.
of the authenticity or authority of the Quran. Yes.
Okay, let's go to the next subject. One of the things that they also say about it is that it uses perfect Arabic, that it is an Arabic book for the Arabic people in the Arabic text.
Now, this is definitely not a subjective area. We are getting into some kind of factual, objective criteria to judge the claims of the Quran. Yes,
Okay,
let's go ahead.
Yeah, there has been study after study looking at a lot of the Arabic language, of course looking at the Arabic words. And when you look at the Arabic words, you will see that there's an awful lot of words that are not Arabic, that have been borrowed from other sources. Give you some examples. You will have certainly insan, which means mankind or Eden. It has an Arabic equivalent, Jannah. Why were they borrow this insan rather than the Jannah, which is an Arabic equivalent? That's an Akkadian word. There are other words like Assyrian words that have been put in. Abraham, sometimes Ibrahim, yet the correct Arabic equivalent would have been Aburahim. With the Arabic there, why did they use the Arabic word? Let's go to your language, Persian words, such as sirat, which means the path. There is an Arabic equivalent, al-tariq. Why did they use al-tariq instead of sirat? Why did they borrow this word from Persian? I can tell you the reason. Because the sirat is actually a bridge that goes across between heaven and the earth, underneath which is hell. And that's found in the Zoroastrian text. So it's an idea that's come straight out of the Zoroastrian text. We're going to get to that a little bit later because that's significant when we look at the sources of the Quran. We look at the stories and a lot of the theology. Has it been borrowed? And the answer, obviously, what I'm going to say is, yes, it has been borrowed. But when you borrow the idea, you also borrow the word. Even though the Arabic equivalent is there. What we're arguing about is this perfect Arabic? No. Other words, hur, disciple, has the Arabic equivalent, tilmith. Why did the Quran use tilmith instead of hur? Or firdaus, meaning the highest or seventh heaven. There is an Arabic equivalent, Jannah. I may be just destroying your language, sorry, the way I pronounce it. But can you see the point we're trying to make?
Yes.
If it is perfect Arabic, why all these borrowings, words from other languages? There's many different languages from other things. There's words that are Egyptian, Hebrew, Syriac, Christian, Aramaic, Ethiopic words. We don't have time to go into all of them. I'll end with just some Greek words that have been borrowed. Injil is uniquely Greek, means the gospel. There is an Arabic equivalent, Bishara. Why did the Quran use Bishara instead of the Injil? So it's these claims that they're making that we need to go back and say, hold on a minute. Look again. You cannot make these claims unless you support it. Obviously, this cannot be supported. Now we're coming to a real contentious area, and that is the fact that the Quran, Muslims believe, is universally applicable. It's a book for all time, for all peoples and all places. What do you think about that? Just off the top of your head.
Unfortunately, our time has come to an end, and we have to end this episode. We will continue our discussion in the next program. Join us next week.